Welcome, humble tree folk, to the suddenly beast-filled mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Sylvaneth in part 3 of our ongoing series, but specifically talking about them in the era of the beast. So this week, rather than talking about the basis of the faction, we kind of covered that in video 1, then we talked about their sole deity, Alariel the Everqueen, in volume 2, and now we're going to talk about basically what they've been up to, and kind of add some greater context to the Age of Sigmar setting. Exploring what the Rite of Life was, why she did it, and all these things, and basically how we got to where we are now, because the Sylvaneth as a faction are integral in moving from Malign Portents, that story arc that was set in Shyish, where Nagash was ascendant, to now where Kragnos is kind of the focus, and we're all set in Gur. It was the Sylvaneth that were kind of the impetus of some of that change, and we're going to explore that today. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top really quick, if you're interested in this video, this faction, or anything to do with Games Workshop games, please consider using my affiliate link in the description down below. Not Just Gaming is an awesome store here in the US, beautiful layout over on the East Coast, with 15% off all Games Workshop products, able to ship just about anywhere, and using that link goes an immensely long way to supporting me, my wife, our channel, all this stuff. It's life-changing, and I'm so grateful for every single one of you who do. Now, for those of you who, again, are fairly new to the Sylvaneth and the overall story of Age of Sigmar, the Sylvaneth, as we mentioned previously this week, have been a driving force within the greater narrative. They were the central focus of one of the first campaign books, the Realmgate Wars, which saw Alariel reawaken in her war aspect, and she was integral to that whole kind of campaign arc, ending with her sending her personal army into a huge Nurgle fort at the Genesis Gate, shutting down the Glotkin and basically taking a defiant stand that Ghyran has not been defeated by the Plague Lord. In the next kind of overarching chapter, that is to say, Malign Portents, her magics were the antithesis of Nagash's power over death, and when the forces of order needed a way into the 8 points to shut down Archaon's supply of Varanite, which was all covered in the Broken Realm series, particularly Book 1, Alariel was the guardian of the Genesis Gate and gave them access, which was a huge deal. Essentially opening a door to hell in her backyard so that the story could go forward is a pretty big ask. But most recently, and I'm sure why many of you are here listening to this, she made some moves called the Rite of Life. Essentially, a colossal ritual where she went to the Oak of Ages Past, a section of the world tree from the world that was, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, whatever you want to call it, and using its magics in tandem with the sacrifice of many of her Sylvaneth, magnified life magic in every corner of the realms. Just as the Necroquake during the Malign Portents kind of arc plunged the realms into twilight with this dark power of undeath, the Rite of Life saw the realms revitalized, renewed, and reawoken with the power of Ghyran. Now, weirdly, this massive touchstone moment of things changing was really just kind of a preamble in the campaign book Broken Realms Kragnos, but the truth is, it's a massive story-wide event. It affected every single thing. Not only was life magic everywhere just kind of invigorated, but also she empowered many of her personal Sylvaneth leaders with the ability to carry the spirit song wherever they went. So wherever these tendrils of Sylvaneth wargroves are going, massive things are happening. Whole forests are being sprouted from the earth. Waterways are being cleansed of any kind of poison or anything like that. It's just a huge deal, as if the world itself was healing. Now, at the time when Broken Realms Kragnos dropped, it was kind of this funny thing where the whole front was a preamble of just her doing this ritual, and you're like, why are we reading about this? And in truth, it was just kind of the MacGuffin needed to break the new god-tier destruction character Kragnos out of his prison. But in truth, this was the tip of the iceberg. Like, now we know that there's more things going on, but for that specific book, it was like, oh yeah, and Alariel's there, and you're like, okay, why? And then things kind of progressed from there. But there's actually a lot going on, and as they've kind of retroactively filled in some details, we've learned quite a bit about the Rite of Life. It did a whole lot more than just act as a one-and-done big spell. The first one is that it reversed a great deal of the damage that the Necroquake did. Specifically, it was like adding a B12 shot to all of nature. Now, to be clear, it didn't reverse all the damage. It didn't quell all the disturbances that Nagash had made. For example, like endless spells are still a thing. There's still enough magic infused in the air that magical spells can still kind of exist if they have enough oomph in the engine, so to speak. But things are not just absolutely wreathed in death magic as they once were. There's a vibrance that has returned to all of the realms. Animals, monsters, and predatory flora all over the realms have swelled in power and ferocity. The population booms, lots of growth for all, like I said, predatory flora, that kind of stuff. And yes, Kragnos was let out of his cage, but it also invigorated everything. So the overall threat of the realms, it just ticked up a notch. Because if you are a City of Sigmar, let's say outpost, right? You're trying to survive in the wilds of whatever realm, it doesn't matter. All of a sudden, all the beasts get bigger. The rivers run a lot rougher, they kind of start to rage, almost like rapids. The forests begin encroaching because they're booming with life so much that now you have to constantly be out there chopping down trees, otherwise your entire fort will get overrun. Roadways are eaten up by grass and trees sprouting from the earth. Maybe huge fish that you didn't know before start to permeate lakes and reservoirs that people needed to drink and get water from, so now everything just becomes dangerous. And that's kind of the thing I want to emphasize. It's not just about breaking Kragnos out of his prison. The overall threat level of everyday existence ticked up when everything starts to boom with life. And as you can see, there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons, right? The pros, of course, being nature regeneration and all these kinds of things. Now there's more natural resources as she's creating forests and stuff. Like, there's a lot of good things happening. The world is healing. At the same time, it's becoming way more dangerous for everyone trying to live in that world. This is, again, highlighting her true allegiance is to nature first, forces of order second. This is nothing but pros for the Sylvaneth. Now, there were some other things noted in this latest battle tome that bear some mentioning. Yes, life was invigorated everywhere, but in truth, the bulk of the power in this ritual was tied to the spirit song of the Sylvaneth. That is to say, wherever Alariel's children are, and thereby extension the spirit song is, their magic is abundant. So now every army that she has is not just, a set of troops that's out in the field that she can communicate with. They are individually nodes of life magic, because they're carrying it all about. She even created a new kind of warrior, the War Song Revenant, to carry the song wherever they go, even further. Just as the roots of a tree tangle and spread into the soil of the earth, so too life magics are spreading through the realms via the spirit song and the armies that carry it. So it affected everything, but the truly intense magics are tied to armies carrying the spirit song. And one last quick note about that ritual. Not only did it affect nature we know in terms of flora and fauna, but it also empowered and activated thousands of points of geomantic power. And this is it's become a theme mostly in this current edition. I feel like the Realmgate Wars, the main focus was Realm Gates. In the Soul Wars, of course, the main focus was souls and how that's an economy that Nagash kind of wants the monopoly on. I feel like for the era of the Beast, the real thing that's been harped on quite a bit are these places of natural power, geomantic power, ley lines that crisscross, and all of a sudden there's naturally occurring springs of arcane power. And the forces of order are able to use these to fight back against anything else that comes their way. In fact, if you have the Stronghold Thondia set, whatever it is for terrain, one of the things that's in there is one of those wells that pulls power out of the ground and projects it as a field that surrounds the encampment, meaning they're using natural places of power to create natural bastions first and then fortifying them with walls and guns and that kind of stuff. Well, Alaria's ritual happens to have awoken many of these points, making them very obvious. It also laid out a blueprint of places that you can go and reasonably set up a new settlement. And so, in essence, it enabled the kind of insane expansion that Sigmar wanted from day one. When the first Stormcast touched the dirt in Akshi, like when we first met them, he wanted to retake the realms. Well, this ritual has enabled that by laying out a clear map. These are places that you can build bastions, and together we can drive out chaos. And so naturally, this lends really well to Alarielle working very closely with the cities of Sigmar, right? It's mentioned a few times in the new Battle Tome. They really do tend to get along with the Dawnbringer crusades, more so than the established cities. There's a lot of things the Sylvaneth can offer them. For example, Sylvaneth can take these Dawnbringer crusades through the realm routes. We talked about that in video 1 of this week. They have shortcuts in reality that will allow these crusades to get where they need to be to these sites of geomantic power and establish crude fortifications and hopefully thrive. When you stack on top of that, it's not just literal, traversing of distance, but the Sylvaneth can also teach them about survival, because nobody knows what the natural, yield, I guess you could say, of the environment, meaning the things you can eat, the things you can harvest, places you can go, places to find water. Nobody would know that better than the Sylvaneth, who deeply are connected with the very environment that everyone's walking through. Having a more active role in helping cities form also gives the Sylvaneth the ability to monitor and shape kind of the nature of creation. By that I mean, if the Sylvaneth take your personal Dawnbringer crusade to a location and they help you establish and fortify and defend it, they're going to have a lot of input on how many resources you take from the woods, how much deforestation happens, how much, fishing happens, all these kinds of things. They want a say in it because they brought you to where you are, and they're helping you coexist with nature. The Living City is a perfect example of true harmony between mortals and nature. It's this big thing that's built in these massive spire trees that go up to the heavens and all these crazy things, but on a micro level, the Dryads and the Branch Witches can sit around and be like, hey, you need to ease up. We'll keep defending you. You have a standing army to watch your back, but we need you to ease up on whatever natural resource you're taking. And honestly, it's a good bargain for any leader of a Dawnbringer crusade. You have a personal army that doesn't need to be fed or clothed or anything like that, and all you have to do is just be a little bit more precious about what you take. It's a good deal all around. Also, attaching themselves to Dawnbringer crusades allows them to go out and explore the realms where they can find things like new soul pod locations, they can spread their groves out into long-forgotten regions, even finding Sylvaneth armies that were reclaimed, meaning through some chaos corruption or something, maybe they were cut off from the spirit song and now they're connected. And I'm just kind of listing off the very practical purposes of having the Sylvaneth be a part of Dawnbringer crusades. They're a wonderful ally to have for all of these reasons and more. Because that's all just like travel and initial setup of a city kind of things that we've talked about so far. But imagine if you're trying to establish your first harvest from your crops you just planted. It'd be really nice to have someone who knows life magic right there to make sure it goes well. Wouldn't that be great? Like, that's just a day-to-day, people need to eat. Sylvaneth don't care so much, but humans do. And someone who can be like, I will ensure that your crops yield a good harvest is really, really nice. And personally, I like the idea of them attaching themselves to Dawnbringer crusades because I like, again, a note that we've hit on every video this week, how alien they are compared to the mortals of the realms. They're just so different. They don't get along, they don't communicate the same, they don't perceive things the same way, they don't have curiosity the same way. And yet, they're the perfect ally to have for this new kind of wave of expansion and growth and exploration. Now, one thing the Battle Tome also touches on that I thought was kind of an interesting note here is what is up with the Kruleboyz. And that's something I didn't even consider. We have this new orc faction called the Kruleboyz that was introduced, and I didn't really see how they had a direct tie or relation to the Sylvaneth. But the Battle Tome makes a pretty interesting argument as to why they matter. So, obviously with the rise of Kragnos, as we talked about before, the Kruleboyz came out of hiding. These are orcs that are much more lengthy and sinewy, focus much more on the guile and tricksy side of orcdom, if you will, who had spent most of the Age of Chaos living in swamps and marshes, basically places where the terrain acted as such a natural deterrent to large armies coming through that they were never conquered. Kind of like how the Fire Slayers built around magma forges and all these kinds of things, that it's just a natural hiding place that if you can survive it and your opponent can't, you have an immediate advantage as a defender. Well, with Kragnos coming out, he's basically riled all of orcdom, and that includes these very, very isolated Kruleboyz tribes who have largely remained in the shadows till now. This has posed a huge threat to other forces of order because if you have read the book Dominion by Darius Hinks, we actually learn in real time what the Kruleboyz are. Like, we learn alongside some Stormcast as they are being confused and perplexed as to what is actually happening. So we get to see all the other forces of order really struggle to comprehend what kind of threat the Kruleboyz pose. I mean, deadly traps that kill hundreds of thousands of people silently. They use all kinds of toxins and psychedelics to break their opponent before ever drawing a sword. Like, it's just a new kind of combat that we weren't ready for. But the Sylvaneth are pointed out in their own battle tome as being a particularly good answer to the Kruleboyz threat. Again, another reason why attaching them to Dawnbringer Crusades is such a freaking good idea. And the truth is because they fight, first of all, in very similar ways. A lot of guerrilla attack kind of stuff. So, meaning the Kruleboyz don't show their entire army up front. They'll kind of pick you apart and make you get to think that they are much bigger than they actually are and kind of break their opponent before attacking, where the Sylvaneth will do hit-and-run tactics, again, not showing the true strength until all the cards are on the table, drawing your forces apart over a large distance in the dark where basically the environment is working against you. However, the natural obstacles that the Kruleboyz use to stay safe or inflict a lot of torment upon their opponents don't really affect the Sylvaneth. They don't care about your marshes and your woods and your swamps. Like, that's their bread and butter. You got a Sylvaneth, a dryad marching in a swamp is only getting healthier because it's walking through water. The Kruleboyz don't fade into the trees quite as well because the Sylvaneth, they know what the trees look like in a way that humans' eyes can't comprehend. Like, they see them. Like, they can't hide in the same way. They can't use natural deterrence the same way. A lot of the edge that the Kruleboyz use to inflict damage upon their enemies is very much blunted because it's all based upon nature. And it turns out, so are the Sylvaneth, so they don't care. All they see is a whole bunch of stupid, lengthy-looking orcs that were pulled straight out of Lord of the Rings and are about to get skewered. And honestly, there's not a whole lot of information there. It really is. I was reading the battle tome and it kind of mentioned the Kruleboyz, and I was like, oh, weird. I wonder why they're mentioning the Kruleboyz here specifically. I mean, there's a lot of threats going on in the realms. Why these guys? Surely they're just trying to dig in a way to push the newest army or something like that. And then I kind of read it and I was like, oh, that actually makes a great deal of sense. You have a faction that's using environments to their fullest extent as a weapon, the Kruleboyz, and then you have an army that is literally just the environment. And it's like, nah, bro. I was like, I like that a lot, actually. It's not oftentimes that a battle tome, points at a different army altogether and it's like, you see that little guy? I wouldn't worry about that little guy. I just thought that was a nice little nudge in the Sylvaneth's favor. Oh, that army that everyone's all up in arms about, everyone's got their panties in a twist regarding? Yeah, we're not super worried about that. And so I wanted to end this video talking about why is this cool? Again, this video is more just catching everyone up to speed with what the Sylvaneth are currently doing. They really did begin this entire chapter, so to speak, of Age of Sigmar, the era of the beast. It's a direct result of Alariel's Rite of Life, which has had a kind of a ripple effect of now there's places for Sigmar's city to go, and now they are also willing to accompany Sigmar's forces and plant these cities, so to speak. And as far as why they're cool, I mean, I've said this a few times throughout this week, in a setting that is very active, like there's always things happening in the mortal realms, new books coming out, new forces being released, that kind of thing. It is so cool to have an army that's always doing things narratively. The Sylvaneth show up in a multitude of stories. Sometimes they're just the forces that get crushed by chaos and then the Stormcast come and save them, but they do make an appearance. Other stories, they're like veritable one-tree wrecking crews that just go in and take on entire chaos forces. There are a lot of in between too. They just kind of show up a ton. And as someone who gets very encouraged to paint and play the game based upon seeing my faction in the lore, I just like reading stories about whatever I'm playing, I get super pumped for that. Another thing that makes them awesome is that in this current era of the game, they ally into a lot of armies, and they absolutely should. I think when Daughters of Cain, their battle tome dropped, a lot of people were like, how come they have allies? Because they screwed everybody over in the Broken Realm series. And there was I did a whole video about why do they have allies? They shouldn't, right? They're hosers, right? They just took everything and ran. Conversely, the Sylvaneth, I'm looking at this, I'm like, how come they don't have more allies? Literally everybody benefits from having them on their side. Now, on their side is sort of in quotations, as we've stressed. Their first priority is nature, second priority is other forces of order. But you see what I mean. When you're talking about the expansion of cities and cities of Sigmar and how the life is bursting at the seams, both from your enemies, meaning Kragnos and all the monsters are getting more dangerous, but also cities are expanding and civilization is growing. It's good in a practical and military sense to have these guys on your side. And in that way, I almost see them as the inverse of the Daughters of Cain, right? People were asking, how come Daughters of Cain still have allies? And I'm over here saying, how come the Sylvaneth don't have more? They're awesome, and they're perfectly suited for this environment that Alarielle helped foster. Life unbridled, abundant and magnified. And when you stack that with how alien they are, and how their lifespans and life cycles are so different from anything that is human, I also like reading about them because now they have a personal investment in the raising and development and formation of mankind, teaching us to live in harmony with nature, not just abuse it or take stuff from it. The Living City is a testament to this, as I mentioned before, but it's interesting when a faction can look at another, meaning the Sylvaneth look at the cities of Sigmar and say, we're going to help you grow because we want you to grow into what we want you to be, in a way that we want you to grow so that you don't become our enemy. Again, first priority is nature, second is factions of order. There are multiple things where they will go to toe-to-toe against cities of Sigmar. Greywater Fastness is a fantastic story. I'll try to remember to leave a link to that video down below, where the two are just oil and water and they cannot coexist. And that was the way it was for a long time. Basically, Greywater Fastness is in Giran. It's a munitions factory, for lack of a better word, for cities of Sigmar. And they have just bombarded the woods with so many, artillery shells that they just laid waste and an entire forest was uprooted and it's just ash. That is the worst case scenario. So going forward, you can see the more optimistic, the more influential Sylvaneth minds, including Alarielle, being like, what if we foster their growth and we prune them just as we're pruning any branch that might grow in the woods to be what we want them to be? And that could have a lot of very sinister and dire context to it, but in the purposes of this discussion, for the explicit purpose of making sure nature is magnified and maintained and treated with respect, it's nothing but a good thing. Now, it's for all these reasons, I think the Sylvaneth are a fantastic army. They're so interesting to learn about. We have so much more to cover. The rest of this week is going to be focused on more of the playing aspects, meaning, starter boxes, reviews, that kind of thing, and then also the Path to Glory rules so that you and I can take this story to the tabletop. But we're going to come back to this faction and going to explore the sub-factions, some of the units and stuff like that in the future. But I wanted to get these lore videos out of the way because they really are a great primer for what the faction is about. They're movers and shakers that have always been relevant and meaningful in the context of Age of Sigmar as a setting, but are deadly and scary in their own right because of how different they are to everything else that is, quote-unquote, on their side, meaning the forces of order. They're so cool. I mean, they're just so stinking cool. I just like the Sylvaneth quite a bit, and I keep rereading the book. I'm holding off. I have some Sylvaneth models, but I'm holding off to make sure I really want them before I pull the trigger and do an army of them. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the Sylvaneth in the comments down below. I would love to read them and catch up with y'all. If you like this video and it helped you at all, please give a thumbs up and share it with somebody. It really does help, the algorithm and all that kind of stuff for YouTube, and goes a long way to supporting me. It doesn't cost you a dime. It would just mean the world to me. I look forward to catching you all in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy painting and happy wargaming.